Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We have a cool episode of Kiss Corner again with me and my buddy
Kiss
Bret
Corner.
over there, where we kind of go through the kind of, I guess, um, redheaded stepchildren albums of the Kiss discography, and we kind of go back and forth on why we like them or why we don't like them. And today's no different. We have another one of those albums. What have we done so far? We've done The Elder and we
Done
did
Elder,
Hot in
Hot in
the
the Shade.
Shade. Ooh, Unmasked
Yeah.
would be a good one. I don't know how you feel about that one.
I love on that's the problem. I feel like we like a lot of the same aside from like this and Hot in the Shade and The Elder. I feel like there are a lot of albums that maybe a lot of other people wouldn't like that we like. Because you had said yourself, like you're a big fan of the 80s era.
Asylum is another big one I like that people don't like for
I
some reason.
I love Asylum, so we couldn't do that. Like I don't like Animalize. I don't know about you.
I like Animalize.
Okay, so then maybe we can do that. Maybe we
Okay,
can do that
cool.
next.
We'll think about that. Or maybe we'll do
Yeah.
Unmasked and we'll have to get somebody from the channel who hates Unmasked to jump on or something.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Cool. But yeah, today we're doing Carnival of Souls. So this is the early. Brett and I were just talking. They started, I guess, planning this or recording it in the early '90s. It didn't come out until '97 after the reunion tour. I think they kind of put it on the shelf for a while, and then they kind
Yeah.
of released it as Carnival of Souls, and they had the final sessions thing in there. Which I don't like, but that's another thing we'll probably get into. But so
Yeah.
it's the last album that they did with Bruce. It's the last album they did with Eric and Bruce together. They obviously went on to do Sonic Boom and Monster with Eric later, but this was pretty much the end of the unmasked Kiss era and the end of, in my opinion, kind of the genuine trajectory of the band. Because I think once they went back to the makeup, I think they kind of did a cycle or they kind of went on a different track than had they not done the reunion. They would have maybe kept going in this direction, or maybe they would have got heavier, or who knows where
Yeah.
it went. But this,
It
from the makeup days to the non-makeup and all that stuff, it was almost like they were on this trajectory, and then the reunion tour happened, and they did a quick 90-degree turn and went a completely different
yeah.
route. So,
Yeah,
but
and I'll bring it up at one point. Like Eric right after everything had happened. Eric Singer, I think, was the most outspoken in terms of how the band approached it and what the band had decided to do. But like I said, I'll get into that when we get there.
yeah, so I'm going to throw it over to you. One question I have, just because I don't know the answer off the top of my head, was this recorded before the Unplugged album or after? Like I
No,
know
it
it
wasn't.
came out after the Unplugged album, right?
It yeah, actually I don't know exactly when Unplugged came out, but this was recorded after Unplugged. And like I had mentioned before we had started recording, the story behind this album, in my opinion, like I enjoy the album obviously, but the story behind this album, the whole process is actually very interesting. And when you get into certain details, it's kind of messed up. It makes you feel bad for Bruce and Eric, um, in terms of like the recording process and when exactly they found out that everything was happening. And it, like I had said, Eric had been very outspoken about it. And when I get to that point, you'll definitely understand why. But if there's anything else you wanted to ask, go ahead. If not, I'll jump right in.
No, I'll throw it over to you, and I'll let you kind of explain your side of the story, talk about the recording, and then talk about what you think about the album, why you like it,
Yeah.
and then we'll kind of go back and forth a bit. I think that'd be
Okay.
good.
Awesome. So yeah, Carnival of Souls. It was the band's 17th studio record. They released it in October 28th of 97. And it's probably one of the more divisive albums since Music from the Elder. And much like Music from the Elder, it was a band wanting to do something different at the time. But also at the same time, it was also seen as what they had pretty much done throughout the entirety of the 1980s, with them kind of just following trends of what was popular. The unfortunate thing was by the time the album had come out in late 97, the height of that whole grunge craze had kind of come and gone. So by then it was seen by fans and critics as too little, too late, which is true. And I'm not saying that the album would have been popular if it was released, 4 years earlier, almost immediately after Revenge when they had started writing for it. But like I said, by 97, it was certainly too little, too late. Um, in an interview that I had read with Bruce, he states that Gene and him had started working on material for this record almost immediately after the Revenge tour. So late 92, early 93. So when you put the early stages of the songwriting process into perspective of the bigger picture, the direction in the album actually makes a lot of sense. This was a point in time where you had a lot of bands, especially like heavy metal bands from the 80s and even earlier, starting to kind of adopt that grunge aesthetic, or at least go in a more modern sound. You know, you had Anthrax doing Sound of White Noise. You had even Rush, like Rush put out Counterparts, and that's the I believe it's the riff from Animate Me, like straight up sounds like a Pearl Jam riff.
Yeah.
And then you even
King's
had like
X, King's X kind of falls in that category too, I think, because they were kind of hair metalish in the beginning.
But just like, you know, bands from, I guess you could say the last 10 to 15, 15 to 20 years, so to speak. And then you even had like the hair metal bands like Winger and Warrant. And then going back to a video you did recently, Promised Land with Queensryche. That was such a modern sounding album compared to what they had done prior. So, you know, in terms of style and sound, you could say that it was the next logical step in direction that the band had on Revenge. The lyrical content is definitely on the more serious, darker side. And I think Gene and Bruce had a much easier time approaching it that way, where Paul, on the other hand, didn't see it that way. And he's been very open and honest. Like, he didn't want to do this album from the start, but Gene was hellbent, and Gene wasn't taking no for an answer. Bruce and Gene had a much easier time approaching it and writing, where I feel like, and this is my opinion, Paul was a little oblivious and slightly ignorant in terms. Like, he, I believe it was in his book, he had stated that to him, grunge was all gloom and doom. And it was some of it, but also, some of it was also serious. And you could write about serious subject matter and everything like that. But the way he saw it was he couldn't wrap his head around it. He was like, well, what am I going to write about? Like, I'm a rich guy. Am I going to write that, like, my butler didn't show up this morning? Yeah. And like, he's like, I'm almost certain that's like an exact quote from his book. And like, I understand that, but you know, it's like he wrote the song "I'll Be There" for his son Evan, who was just right at the time. So like, he showed that he could write serious, like he can write a serious subject matter. Like, he, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, all let's put the X in sex and lick it up. But if there's one person that does stand out on this record, it's by and large, it's Bruce. Like, Bruce is the MVP of this record, and he's very much the driving force, even though, you know, it was all Gene's idea. Bruce has 9 out of 12 songwriting credits, which I had looked back. I think the most he had was maybe 6 on Asylum, maybe, like, but that much he has never had before. He sang vocals on the song "I Walk Alone," and he also played bass on half the record, which I didn't know until I looked it up. Like 6, I think it was like there's like 12 tracks. He played bass on 6 of those. The interesting thing was, and I had said, like, you know, even though, you know, Bruce was the driving force and it was Gene's idea to do the record, I found a really interesting quote from Gene in the Behind the Mask book when they first started talking about the record. And he said pretty much by 92, 93, him and Paul were convinced that the original lineup was never getting back together. Because I believe it was like the early 90s when they kind of toyed with that. I feel like they kind of toyed with that idea a little bit. You know, you think back to the Rise to It video, and the fact that they tried to get Ace to open up for them on that tour. Like, I feel like they were starting to toy with it a little bit, but by that point they were just like, it's never going to happen. So as far as he was concerned, he wanted to make a home for Bruce and Eric. And the quote was, I have it right here. It goes, "Let's make believe this is a new band. Forget about all the rules. Forget about Kiss. Forget about everything. Let's try and make a home for Bruce and Eric." It's safe to say that every different iteration era of the band has had its own identity in terms of sound and style. And him wanting to do Carnival of Souls was simply that. He wanted to give the lineup that they had with Bruce and Eric its own identity. And he wasn't, you know, even though it was something that Paul was against, unfortunately, but that's what was most important to him. And he's not afraid to Gene's certainly not afraid to take the blame for the album. He doesn't have any regrets. It's a very different tone compared to when you think of, like, you look back to The Elder, how he takes credit for it, but he's like, if I could go back in time, I'd erase the album from existence. I'd pretend that it had never happened. But that's pretty much like the the early stages of the album. Not the early. That's pretty much like the synopsis of the record. But you then you look into the recording process and everything that happened after, the fact that it was it was heavily bootlegged, and then they weren't going to release it, and they finally released it, and it's just it comes and goes. I think it was on the charts for maybe like a total of 4 weeks, and by the end it sold like less than 50. It sold anywhere between like 40 and 50,000 copies, which I'm pretty sure like The Elder sold more than that. Yeah, like I said, that's pretty much like the synopsis of the record. I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to get into, or if you wanted me to continue.
No, just in terms of the recording process, like I was well aware that Bruce had a lot to do in the production of this album and the writing and all of that stuff, and that he was kind of like really pushing this. And I think I've even seen either seen interviews or read, like I've seen and read so much Kiss stuff that like it kind of blends together. I don't even know what's what anymore. But I think Bruce was even talking about how Gene and Paul were kind of focused, or it seemed like their focus was somewhere else, or that their attention was somewhere else. And I think in these sessions at some point is when they broke it to them that they were getting back together with Ace and Peter. I might have that timeline a little wrong.
You pretty much have it. Like, that's the crazy part. Like, so they did the Unplugged in August of 95, and almost instantly, like we all know this, almost instantly talks of the reunion start right after. They go into the studio in November of 95, which means that they had already known that the reunion tour was happening when they started recording this album, which is kind of messed up. Like, in my opinion, that's kind of messed up. Eric, in the book, I can't remember if I had read it in a book or he talked about the A&E biography, but they pretty much, they told them like 2 days before the record was done. And they were in the studio from November 95 to February of 96. Like, literally days before the album was done, they come in and they're like, hey guys, we're going to put this album out. I mean, the original album's getting back together. We're going to put this album on hold, but don't worry, it's going to come out. And then obviously the major success of the reunion tour totally just puts the squash on that. One thing I'd come across was, in one of the books I had, they had a quote from Gene from a interview that he did in, like, I think April of 96. So it was before the reunion tour had even happened. Like, they had just announced it. He had said that they were still planning on putting the album out after the tour was done, and there was talks of a tour, which like gave people the assumption that the reunion tour was going to be a one and done type of thing. Which, like, yeah. I feel like even at that point, people were like, no, like, this isn't going to be, like, this is it. Like, this is it for the band. I'm sure, obviously, Bruce and Eric would have liked to have, thought differently about that situation. But yeah, like I said, like by like April of 96, he was still saying that the album was going to come out. Obviously, that doesn't happen. And I think it was by like, that was... Let's see. I believe the reunion tour ended in July of 97. And it was like maybe April or May of that year when the album had leaked. Now, that was the one thing, I don't know if you know about this, but I wasn't able to find like anything related to how exactly the album leaked. Everything that I had read, it just said, yeah, like the album leaked, it wound up on the internet, it wound up being circulated via bootleg circles and everything like that. But I couldn't find like anything like particularly related to that, aside from, like I said, it happened and then Gene got the FBI involved, and that was it. Like nothing beyond that.
Not 100% sure about the leak. I do know it was circulated for quite a while, but something very similar happened with Guns N' Roses and Chinese Democracy. Like, those songs were floating around for years before that album came out. It's just hard, I guess. Like, you record an album and it doesn't come out right away. The longer it sits on the shelf, the more opportunities there are for people to somehow get a hold of it, right?
Yeah, and the thing about that was that I I think it was not too long after the reunion tour had ended that Polygram had made the decision that they were going to release it. But there was also a rumor at the time that they didn't want to because they were worried that the sound of the album and just how different it was going to somehow affect like the newfound popularity that the band had gained.
Like muddy the waters a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like they were worried that was going to happen. And then ultimately they wound up releasing it. And it was a very quiet release. They released it in the midst of when the back catalog was being remastered and re-released. And the funny thing about all this was that it was like a week or so before the album had come out. Gene and Paul went on a PR tour because they were talking. I think they were going to be starting to promote the second leg of the reunion tour, which is the Lost Cities tour, and they talked about everything except the except the fact that they had an album coming out at the end of the week, which I'm sure not so much Bruce, because Bruce has always been a team player, but to Eric was really frustrated about it. And actually, I had mentioned it before, but a quote that I had from an interview that I read with Eric, he had said, it seemed like every time we tried to do something that was new, Paul and Gene wanted to concentrate on things related to the past and not moving forward. I know I wouldn't be here without the past, but I have nothing to do with the past. So it was really difficult and frustrating to me. And then even when they had announced that the album was coming out, like he wanted nothing to do with promotion. Like he didn't want anything to do with it. It was all Bruce. Like Bruce would literally talk to anyone and everyone that would ask him a question about Carnival of Souls, where, Peter and Gene and Paul just totally ignored it. And then Eric was just, and I don't blame him. Just didn't want anything to do with it.
I do know too, interestingly, that Bruce and Eric got paid while Kiss were out on the road. And I think the concept behind that was, I think Gene and Paul wanted to not tie them up. That sounds negative, but I think they wanted them on standby. I think the idea was, let's see if Ace and Peter don't like mess up, and let's not let Eric go back and join Tony Iommi or Bruce go off and, he did Grand Funk Railroad later, but he could have done anything, right? So I think that was part of the idea. I don't think...
I'm sorry, you go.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, like, I think because of the circumstances in terms of not having confidence from the record label, probably had a lot to do with, they probably released it because of contractual obligations. They probably needed to produce an album by a certain period of time. Yeah,
because they certainly, Polygram knew they weren't going to make any money off this because of the fact that it had already been bootlegged for a year and a half by that point. Yeah,
and typically what's part of the deal with contracts with record companies is promotion and stuff. So probably the idea behind it was, let's not sink more money. Let's not go more in the red with this album. So just don't even talk about it. We'll just quietly put it out and see what happens with the reunion tour and all that, right? So
I don't know if I had said it before we started recording at the beginning, but it was on the charts for 4 weeks and then it just disappeared. But going back to what you'd said about Eric and Bruce being on contract, one of the interviews that I read, Bruce even said that they were under contract, but then the reunion tour ended in July of 97, and then by August of that year, they had him and Eric quit the band, which I don't know if a lot of people even know that, because of the fact that the original lineup was back together. You don't think that they have these two people on standby just in case. But the way they saw it is that they saw how successful it was, and they're like, okay, well, we're gone. You know what I mean? Like, you guys do what you need to do.
And Eric, he went off and he played with Alice Cooper. I can't remember what else he did, but he definitely
Union.
Cooper.
He had the band Union. He had played with Lita Ford for a little bit.
Was Eric in Union?
Yeah, he was in Union. And then at least I was watching a performance on YouTube the other day of them playing from Switzerland, and he's on drums. But then he also had he had the Eric Singer project, which also had Bruce in it. I'm almost certain at some point he was in Union. Like I said, he was in the concert I was watching the other day on YouTube.
Well, they did do 2 albums. I've never listened to those 2 albums. I have no idea what they sound like. John Croppi is the vocalist, right? And I remember actually even being a kid, and I remember having one of the Kiss magazines. I don't remember. It was one of the I think it was either promoting the Psycho Circus tour, or it was promoting the Detroit Rock City movie or something. And I remember seeing the big full page ad for, I think it was Union Blue Room. I think it was their second album. Yeah. I remember seeing that and being interested in it, but I've never come across it. So I never bought it. And then years go by, and I've probably searched on YouTube and listened to it but I don't remember anything about it. So
Yeah, no, those are. I couldn't tell you much off the top of my head, but I just remember listening to those albums. I remember liking them because my mom was a big John Corabi fan, so she had listened to those albums so much.
mm-hmm.
I do remember when I was on the cruise back in 2018. Uh, John Corabi's band that he was in at the time, the Dead Daisies, was performing, and people were hoping that maybe we were going to get like some form of a union reunion because obviously Bruce was there and obviously Eric was there, but unfortunately that had never come to pass. I think like the most we got was Eric introducing the Dead Daisies and making a joke saying, like, this is the closest you're going to get right now to a union reunion.
That's hilarious. That just sounds hilarious.
Yeah, just the wording of it.
But yeah, what do you think about like the songs and the actual material?
I like it. I really like it. It's kind of, I guess, my gimmick that I enjoy the albums where they decided to do something different and kind of stray away from it. And I'd even said it in the beginning, like, you look at the songwriting and the style of it, and it's certainly a step in the direction of where you kind of heard that they were going on Revenge, even though Revenge was still certainly a Kiss record in terms of, it was up until that point, Revenge was probably the heaviest album they had done. And in terms of a Kiss record, it still had, the lyrical content and everything like that. Songs like Spit and Heart of Chrome. And, it still had that blueprint, but they had decided to take a more serious direction on it. I am curious, though, in terms of like, they originally had wanted Bob Ezrin to do the record, and he couldn't. And he was the one that had recommended him Toby Wright. I believe that's the producer's name. So it makes you wonder, like, what the album would have sounded like if Bob had produced the record, because Bob's a little bit more stern in terms of like the producers they've worked with. I'm not sure if he would have allowed them to kind of go into that direction, because when Bob's producing a record, it's just Bob. Where Carnival of Souls, it was Gene, Paul, and Toby. But they knew that they were going to get, because by that point, Toby had produced Alice in Chains. And then, he would go on to produce, bands like Korn and Biohazard, and like a lot of those bands that were associated with, the mid to late 90s hard rock, post alternative, new metal, whatever it is you want to call it. But I really like it. I really like the songwriting on it. Jungle is one of my favorite tracks off of it. You got Jungle. You have the opening track, Hate, which is a really good one. I love it. I love everything about it. And funny enough, the one song I don't really care for on it is Paul's song, I'll Be There. It's a well-written song. It doesn't really do it for me when you look at the full album.
Yeah, it doesn't fit. Not the music, but the
lyrical content.
Yeah, it's kind of a shifty song where he's singing about his son, and like you got this really heavy album, and it's like the heaviest they've ever done, and you're just kind of like, like it just doesn't kind of fit on a record like this. I don't know, something about that. But this music itself is fine. Like it sounds like the rest of the album. Like it doesn't stick out in that way. It sticks out in when you listen to what he's talking about. You're kind of like, I know he's talking about his son, and that's kind of, I don't know.
And it's definitely,
I just picture him picking him up at baseball practice and stuff, like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, like I looked through his book I looked through his book to see what he'd said about it. And pretty much the extent of it was him not wanting to do it, not knowing how to approach it. Then he had his son, and he's like, there it is. I'll write a song about my son. Where funny enough, in Gene's book, Gene just completely jumps over it. Like he talks about the reunion tour, I think, like Sophie being born, and then the Unplugged, Sophie being born, and then reunion tour. Like there's like that 6-7 year gap where it's just like kind of nothing happened. And I hinted earlier, like Bruce is the MVP of this album. He helped write so much, and the reason that is because he even said it himself. Like he went to both Paul and Gene and was like, let me help you write stuff. And they were totally open for it. Paul more so than Gene. I think like Gene kind of had a better grasp on it, but Bruce being there definitely helped it. Some interesting songwriting credits on it. Tommy Thayer writes a song on it again. Jamie St. James, the singer of Black and Blue wrote, and I actually think they had both. I think Tommy Thayer wrote something on Hot in the Shade as well, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Not. I'd have to go back and double check.
Okay,
you're probably right. He was around for a long time.
Yeah, he was.
Did he have credits even before Hot in the Shade?
No, I don't think so. Because I think Hot in the Shade was the first when he had started working with them. Even though like Gene had produced them up until that point.
Yeah, they were associated with Gene like in the 80s and stuff.
Yeah, I already said it, but my one favorite track on the album is Jungle. And the thing about Jungle was that it was released as the first single of the record. And even though nobody cared about the album like did very terrible. That song actually had like a moderate amount of success on like modern hard rock radio, and then it had even been it has been awarded the 1997 Reader's Choice Song of 1997 by Metal Edge magazine. And that's something that that Bruce has always found very funny, the fact that, you know, there were fans that obviously wanted to hear it in the end, but obviously all the outside forces causing it to not really succeed. And then I believe after that they had released Master and Slave as the second single. But by that point, like the album came out in November, and I think they didn't release the second single until like sometime early next year. And by that point, nobody cared about the record. You know, I've said it already. The album was on the Billboard charts for 4 weeks, and both Gene and Paul and the record label were completely fine with the fact that they were going to release it, and it was going to experience a very quiet and very quick death.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually remember seeing it in the record store, in the CD store. I think whenever I bought my first Kiss album with my own money, which was Kiss Alive 3, I've talked about this before. I remember seeing this album, and this was during the reunion tour. Like this was when they were back together in makeup and stuff like this. So I was in Carnival of Souls, and I must have been like 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. And I remember getting Kiss Alive 3, and I was already familiar that they had a period without makeup. So it wasn't weird that I was seeing this album without makeup. What kind of threw me off was the subtitle, The Final Sessions. Because I remember thinking, like, what does that mean? Like, I just remember being confused by that as a kid.
Yeah.
Right? That almost could have been the first Kiss CD I ever bought. Could have been Carnival of Souls, which would have been, and I think I went with Kiss Alive 3 because it had like Rock and Roll All Night and songs that I knew. And that's why I went with that one.
Yeah.
To me at the time, like I was cool with the non-makeup stuff. I'm curious as to now looking back in hindsight, like what I would have thought about it had I bought it back then. Because I have no idea what my opinion would have been had I bought it when it came out. And that would have been
very interesting.
But what would have happened was it would have been a kid taking this album home, familiar with Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, and even like Kiss Exposed and like Lick It Up and Rock and Roll Night, taking this album home and it sounding nothing like the Kiss I knew, and just maybe being confused and not understanding what was happening at the time, because just like I said, the subtitle itself, The Final Sessions, confused the hell out of me.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and I probably didn't hear this record until like way later. I know I've listened to it over the years. I'm familiar with Childhood's End and Jungle and stuff like this, right?
Yeah.
But and I've listened to the full thing through, but I never really owned it. I only listened to it digitally, and I only listened to it digitally recently. The production's good. It is super heavy, but like what's interesting is up to this point, Revenge was probably their heaviest record.
Yeah.
But when you listen to stuff on there like Take It Off, that's not so far removed from what they had been doing just a few years earlier. Like it still sounds like, at least
it still had that blueprint.
It wasn't so far from the projection, the projection that they were on from Crazy Nights, Smash Stashes and Hits, Hot in the Shade. It wasn't that far. It wasn't really much of a deviation, other than they really went with the Hot in the Shade route and really went, but more so even with the harder edge and the like just being heavier overall. Even the look, they totally got rid of the color by the time Revenge came out. There was no color, and they were all black. They were all leather. So the image wise, they looked the heaviest they had ever looked, and then production wise or sound structure wise, it was the heaviest they had sounded, at least up to that point. You can maybe argue some stuff off Creatures was maybe a little bit heavier here and there, but
songs like even the song itself, the title track, Creatures of the Night, Danger is heavy, Killer. Yeah. Like every up until that point, Creatures was the heaviest album. And then, you have the 80s and then Revenge comes out. The interesting thing was that, you look at the time between Creatures and Revenge, and then you look at the time frame between Creatures, Revenge, and Carnival, and there's nothing in between to kind of like bookend those sounds. It's literally they did Revenge, and then 4 years later or whatever it was, they're like, okay, here's Carnival of Souls. Like there was no in between period.
Yeah, and it's so heavy and contemporary, and really the thing that most makes it sound like a Kiss album is the vocals, because Gene sounds like Gene and Paul sounds like Paul.
Yeah.
But other than that, like really, you could remove all the vocals and just have a different singer, and you could slap any band name on it. You could just put any name on this record when it came out, and it would have been any other band, any other.
Yeah, and that's what's unfortunate about it. And the same can be said for some of the stuff that they were doing through the 80s. It's like they were just following trends, and this was clearly them following a trend. In terms of what you think 92, 93 when they first started writing it. Nevermind had been out for a year. You had Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots. You had all these bands, coming in with that sound. You had, I said this already, you had other bands starting to modernize their sounds. And actually one quote that I don't know if I said it earlier, one quote that I had found in Paul's book, which made me laugh, was when Gene approached him about the album, he said he wanted to out Metallica. Whatever that means.
Yeah.
Like, I guess he saw that Metallica had drastically changed their sound from being this thrash metal band to being just like a hard rock heavy metal band, and thinking like, and seeing how well it did for them, and figured, oh, okay, I Gene, his typical, with him and his ego, like, oh, I can do that. And he could, like, that's the thing, he was able to back it up. It's just, they're not the band. Unfortunately, they're not that type of band to be doing something like that.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is even though Kiss, they're perceived as like a hard rock or a heavy metal band, they sound more like Kiss when they're doing something like I Was Made for Loving You than they do when they're doing something this alternative and heavy. This doesn't even sound like that. It's just such an interesting dynamic because they're not really a heavy metal band, like at least in the terms of the classic style of heavy metal that when I think of,
like they have their moments where you can incorporate it. Like obviously, going back to Creatures of the Night, the song Creatures of the Night is very much a heavy metal song. The drive that it has, the solo, that's a heavy metal song. But then you listen to the song literally right after that, Keep Me Coming. Yeah. That is not a heavy metal song. Yeah. It's more in the lines of like what you would expect from a Kiss song.
Yeah, absolutely. But in terms of the songs themselves, I mean, like, they're not bad. Just on a subjective level, listening to it, they're okay. Childhood's End sounds like a throwback to Gene's solo album, at least the melody. That's what it reminds me of.
I think the same thing every time I hear it. Like this could have been it rearranged somehow. This could have been on Gene's solo album.
Yeah, for sure. And like you mentioned, Jungle, Rain is another one that stands out to me. Just that chorus.
The
one interesting thing about this album. Okay, before I get into that, so the album itself, I don't think it's necessarily bad or horrible when I'm listening to it. It's just once it's kind of done, it's done. I can't really I'm looking at the track list. I've been listening to this album for a while now because we've been talking about doing this for a while, and none of that. I have to think about each song specifically, other than a couple like Childhood's End and stuff like this, which the melody at least is kind of hooky. But the one interesting thing about this song is I Walk Alone, because Bruce sings this song, but what's odd about his vocals is he sounds like Ace. His vocal in the chorus is like, because they both have thick New York accents, he sounds like Ace. And even his guitar playing sounds like Ace on this song in particular. The solo is, I don't want to say simple because Ace, I'm not trying to put Ace down, but when you listen to Bruce on like Asylum, he can shred. And Ace isn't really known for that. Ace is more kind of like I've pictured like his solo on "I Was Made for Loving You." It's very classy and like just kind of like a cool guitar lick. That's what this solo sounds like. It sounds like a classy kind of guitar lick that's, maybe simple compared to shredding. But the whole song itself makes me feel nostalgic because in a weird way where it's like, this is what it would sound like if Ace was on this album. And even the song title, "I Walk Alone," that sounds like an Ace song title too.
Yeah.
Like it's great. It sounds like, wow, this is such a weird, they almost channeled Ace for this one. So even though I know it's Bruce, and I'm not trying to say Bruce is Ace or anything like this. It's
you don't want to do that with the way some people get over, who's a better guitarist.
Yeah, but you obviously heard the same thing, especially in the chorus and
the way he says ground, the way I keep my feet on the ground or whatever, like that line in particular. I'm hearing in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds like Ace. And the thing is, I'll be honest, I didn't pick up on that until you just said it, because there has been listening to the song, I'm like, there's something about this song that I can't put my finger on. And it was driving me crazy. And there it was right there. Like he sounds like Ace on that track.
Yeah. Go back and listen to it now with that thought in your head. Other than like the verses don't sound so much like Ace. It's more the chorus. I guess when it first starts off and he's kind of whispering his tone is low or whatever, he's not. Once he brings his voice up in like the chorus, then that's where you can hear like, whoa, this sounds like Ace could have sang this, which is interesting too. Cause it's like, what would Ace have sounded like on like a 90s Kiss album? This is probably the closest you're going to get, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think there's nothing particularly that I hate about the album, but there's not much I really love about the album either, just on a subjective. But I don't hate it as much. I think I'm not a big fan of Psycho Circus. I can't even listen to Psycho Circus. So this is at least listenable.
That was another idea we were going to do, but I think you and Martin had already done Psycho Circus.
Yeah, we've done Psycho Circus. I like the title track's okay and Into the Void's okay, but basically for this album, I find that once it's over, it's over. It doesn't really stick in my mind very much, and it's very generic. And you've already mentioned some of this. It seems very disingenuous. I think when we were doing another panel discussion or something, Carnival of Souls came up, and somebody made a funny comment about how they picture Paul being in a shop in Beverly Hills with his security guard picking out flannel shirts. You know what I mean? Like, that's hilarious because it's probably true.
That's exactly how he approached it. I had said, he's like, what am I going to sing about? My butler not showing up? Like he was very vocal in the 90s, even before this. Like he was very vocal about just the aesthetic and the image that grunge music gave off, that grunge music gave off. And he's like, the only, I for some reason, there's a quote that's sticking in my head saying the only type of, it was something about whining. And he had said like, the only type of wine I like is with my dinner or something like that. But what you had just said hits the nail like right on the head. Like, here he is, he was a millionaire by that point or whatever. And he's, in some, secondhand thrift shop, like trying to look for the best, raggedy flannel, which this wasn't even, I just want to say like, this wasn't on purpose. I put on the first thing I could find. It was a flannel shirt. So I'm not trying to fit the aesthetic of what we're talking about.
And by the way, we didn't do the backgrounds on purpose either. That was just, we both showed up.
Yeah, that made me laugh.
Was this an alternate cover? Because I want to get into the cover real quick too. I don't like the cover for this album.
I don't either.
It makes it look like it doesn't look real. Like it's yeah. I like band shots on album covers. I know some people don't. I like band shots on album covers, but this in particular, like literally looks like somebody walked in the rehearsal studio with a camera and said, "Hey guys," and they all turned around and they took a picture, like while they were chatting about something. Like, oh, you're gonna do that there. Like it's just something. I think if they did something like the classic Revenge poster where they're standing with all the black leather and they're in front of that would have been like something cooler for this album cover. I don't like the album cover. I don't like the final sessions. That just confuses me to this day.
The interesting thing about this picture. So first off, the album wasn't going to be called Carnival of Souls. I guess that was another thing I couldn't really find a lot about. Apparently, the fans had named it Carnival of Souls. They were the ones that came up with the album title, apparently. Now, from what I remember, this picture was shown in the Kiss My Ass home video. I don't know if you remember it, but
Yeah, I had it on VHS and DVD. I still have it, actually.
yeah, same here. At the end, they're showing artwork, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be the artwork for the next album we're working on. We don't have a title for it yet." For some reason, I don't know, and I don't think I saw this in any of the things I was looking through, and I looked through a lot of stuff, but I think for some reason, at one point they said the album was going to be named like Head or something. Like it was just something really just like one word, something just like very minimalist and very weird. Ultimately, I think this would have been a better album cover than what they had. The whole addition to you had mentioned, like you still never really understood the final session thing. That was something that the record label thought of, I think. And, the way kind of fans interpret it is it's the final sessions of, not only the non-makeup era, but of Bruce and Eric in the end.
Mm-hmm. I want to get into a few things. So I'm not going to get into album sales or anything. We know that this, did not have a lot of confidence from the band or the record label. So there's no point talking about album sales. I'm not going to talk about set lists because we know that they never even performed this stuff live. They never toured to push the album or anything like this.
Yeah. I said before, the closest I ever gotten to see any of these songs performed live was Bruce Kulick's band on the Kiss cruise.
Mm-hmm. And I do know it is pretty polarizing. There are a lot of Kiss fans that love it. I'm pretty sure Martin gives it a positive review. I did find 2 negative reviews, so I'm going to read them for you. One is from a fan and one is from a critic. So here's a critic. Here's a negative critic review. This is from AllMusic. I use them a lot because they give you a star rating, so I like using the star rating, and they have a fan star rating as well. So the user reviews stars, or the fans gave this album on AllMusic 3.5 stars out of 5. AllMusic gave it 2 stars. AllMusic said, unsurprisingly, the unreleased album became a hot bootleg in collectors' circles, paving the way for its official release in fall 1997. In some ways, it should have stayed unreleased. Since Carnival of Souls hardly captures Kiss at their best, none of the songs, either the predictable rockers or the by-the-book power ballads, stand out, and the music sounds canned, forced, and overproduced, with little of the self-deprecating humor that made the comeback tour a success. Only the dedicated, who probably already own it on bootleg, will have the patience to wade through the whole record to find the few minor items of worth. It's interesting because there's not a ton of power ballads on it, and I wouldn't say there's any predictable rockers on it either.
There's not, and also so I wouldn't say it's overproduced in the slightest bit. It's just like there's really nothing special about it, especially when you think of like who was producing it and what he was doing at the time. It's just a very straightforward record, in my opinion. Like there's really nothing. I don't know if there's like certain specific things that he was referencing that to, but it doesn't sound overproduced.
I would say it's more generic than it is predictable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Here's a fan review who gave it 0.5 star. It's a wonder as to why the label felt the need to release this monstrosity on the world. Not only does it not sound like Kiss, it reeks of desperation in its attempt to fit in with the grunge scene. The guitars are muddy and the vocals are atrocious. I would love someone to explain what they are singing about on these horrible songs. So there's a negative fan review too.
Yeah.
What would have been interesting, because they had Bruce and Eric on standby, would have been interesting if they continued both versions of the band. Like they do shows with Peter and Ace in the makeup, and they do stadiums and this and that. But then they also do like maybe a club circuit like they did with Revenge. I guess at that point, it wouldn't have worked. But in my mind, it's kind of cool to think like, oh, there could have been 2 versions.
Yeah,
and like they continued on as they would have, and also they do the big shows with Ace and Peter. It would have been interesting, but.
Yeah, but you figured by like 90, by the end of that first leg of the reunion tour, they were making more money than they had ever made at that point. So they were like, what would be the point? It'd be useless.
But how cool! But when you play with that idea a little bit, how cool would it have been? Oh, they did on Unmasked, but not even just like doing separately, but what they did not Unmasked, Unplugged, where they had all 6 guys. Well, how cool would it have been if they did a record and they had Eric, Bruce involved, and Ace and Peter?
Yeah, that would
have been a cool super Kiss group, Like,
that would be so cool. And obviously, I wasn't able. I watched the the Unplugged when it was on MTV and all that. But the closest that I had ever experienced of something like that would be the Kiss Cruise, because when they did that first night with the acoustic show, they played with the current lineup, and then Bruce came out, and then Tommy came out, and then Ace came out at one point. Like, you had Kiss with you had Kiss with Bruce, Eric, and Ace all playing on stage together. I'm like, this is absolutely insane. Like, when are you ever going to be able to see something like this ever again? And ultimately, them doing something like that would be awesome, even if it was unmasked, even if it was non-makeup. You know what I mean? Like, just do a whole tour out of that. I think it would have been popular. I'm not going to say it would have been as popular as the reunion tour, because of the fact that you had, them in makeup and costume, and you had, the stage kind of looked like the like a Love Gun Alive 2 stage. But I think if they would have done something like that, it would have had a moderate amount of success. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to bring up, or?
No, not that I can think of. If I had to say one last thing about the album, is just give it's the same thing I'm going to say about The Elder. Just give it a shot, man. I think it's worth a listen. Unfortunately, you can't really say that to Kiss fans, because a lot of them have already made up their mind. But if you're ever willing to take a trip back and listen to it, I think it's, 24 years of hindsight or whatever it was, like, it's worth checking out.
Yeah, and I'll just say that it does mirror The Elder in a lot of ways, in the sense that it was, when it came out, it kind of just got swept under the rug. And they were both albums that sounded nothing like everything that came before. So it's just interesting that they do resemble each other that way. And they're both polarizing to Kiss fans. So it's, if you want to try something different from Kiss, that's a little more alternative, heavy version of Kiss, then it's okay. I don't know. I didn't mind it. I don't hate it.
No.
It hasn't stuck with me very well over the years.
Yeah.
So, but I guess we'll call it a day, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. See you later, everybody.
That's it, dude.